There we go.
Perfect. Take it away.
Greetings. Whatcha? My presentation this morning or this afternoon, I don't even know what time it is even here in Winnipeg, is I'm going to switch from rural broadband to food, the way the community, this is done based on my research for my PhD. And so I'm talking about Eeyou Meechum is everything, finding Eeyou Meechum, Miyo Pimâtisiwin, Meechum in the good life of food in Cree, the Northern Cree of Northern Quebec, the Eeyouch Cree. And just a quick introduction of who I am. That's interesting. That's who I am. I am currently a professor of Indigenous Studies at the University of Winnipeg, and I am a Biwadi, a visitor to this land. That means I'm in, as they call me in Northern Quebec, a Wemstishkiu. I have a spirit name that's Mang and Disnakas Mai Gan Makade Dodem. That's the loon of the Black Wolf clan, which infuses my way of teaching and understanding with storytelling and taking stories from communities and bringing it to communities. And also the work that I'm going to present today is really just standing on the land, eating the food, being with my Northern Cree community, the Eeyouch Cree of Northern Quebec, and really just listening to them. And so that's me doing a listening group, and I've worked with the Northern Cree in Quebec, the Eeyouch Cree, for the past almost 10 years. So we are not going to get through this, and I'm going to have to fast forward and make this presentation quite compact, but this is sort of what I'd like to be able to introduce. Why did I do the work? What does the literature say? Where is Eeyou Istchee? What did I find, or what do I understand? A little bit of methodology and methods, what I was trying to discover, not discover, that's a terrible word, but I was trying to understand, discussion and conclusions. We might make it halfway through. And I've really tried to pare this down, and I'm going to go quickly. Please feel free to stand up and interrupt or walk out, whatever you need to do. So we know food security is often seen from a mainstream ideal that is achieved through increasing agricultural production that meets the growing demand for food. We actually do know for a fact that in Indigenous communities, secure food systems are often seen through local Indigenous lenses, as including factors that are not part of the main dialogue or the main discourse on food security sovereignty. That's why I came up with the term Eeyou Miyo Pimâtisiwin, which means the good life of food. It means that sometimes food is procured in a racism, in oppressive and racism environments. We don't consume all the food that we have, and we are doing things not in a good way in our Western food systems. So the framework that I understood this through was through breaking it down through understanding Miyo Pimâtisiwin. And we can understand Miyo Pimâtisiwin as an awareness and a unifying thread that sees cultural health determination, cultural health, socioeconomic health, self-determination, law, and community goals, all bound into one. Miyo Pimâtisiwin is such a concrete and powerful notion in many communities. It also exists in the notion of Wechone-Washte in Dakota communities. It exists in Northern Quebec through a holistic understanding, and it exists in, when we talk about law, Miyo Pimâtisiwin exists in law as a well-functioning legal system. And that legal system actually underpins what good food systems look like. So we know you're starting from a literature position, and what I looked at was understanding Indigenous and Cree food systems, food security, food sovereignty, and food justice discourses, but really understanding how Miyo Pimâtisiwin relates to imposed food insecurity, what people want to eat, what they have to eat. Miyo Pimâtisiwin protects communities as a general kind of overarching legal system, and it's related to roles that, Indigenous law plays in Miyo Pimâtisiwin. That's, for those of you, I have them. Ferraro Rocher, before doing this presentation, it wasn't a great idea. Menuman is gathered in the canoe it's knocked off, and Meechum has such a powerful presence in lots of Indigenous, especially Northwest Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta nations. But what I found was a quote from Merchant in a book, "Seeing the world through the eyes of a plant is an agricultural people's vision." And we don't often use that kind of way of knowing and understanding through our own networks. And when we look at what Indigenous food, Meechum Miyo Pimâtisiwin supports and is supported by, this network is a really long list of things that are supported through food. And I highlighted a few: cooking techniques, regional Indigenous histories, Indigenous medicine, and seasonal lifestyles of butchery. But on top of that, it includes gender roles, land stewardship, sacred narratives, permaculture, fermentation. These are all really, it grows exponentially the role of Miyo Pimâtisiwin, or good life, in terms of understanding of food systems. So we have to put it in context. Eeyou Istchee is a northern, as I said, Northern Quebec, 10 nations gathered in Northern Quebec, that was first signed into, or first actually recognized as a treaty nation in 1975. And they negotiated a treaty with the Quebec and federal governments 24 times, including Les Pays des Braves. Not necessarily important to understand, but it's part of the post-memory of how people see and live and breathe their food system. It is also a society and nation that has been greatly impacted by hydroelectricity. The dam that exists in La Grande is about, I don't know, 50-foot football fields, took 10 years to build. That's where Quebec, New York, Vermont, Massachusetts generates all the power. It devastated the lands and they redirected waterways. And so when people signed the treaty, they understood this was coming. They tried to benefit from it. So a decontextualized case study has no place in research. That means we need to do the research and understand. And as I said, I've been working with my friends and relatives up in Northern Quebec for the past 10 years. So this is really not that important, because what's important is to figure out or understand what was said. But it's important to understand methods and methodologies. The goal of the study was to understand and localize how Indigenous food systems conceptualize protection, food security, and provide well-being for people in Eeyou Istchee. That means when we talk about Indigenous food systems, or Indigenous food sovereignty, or Indigenous food security, that's where the conversation begins. We actually should be talking about how each nation and community sees its own health, protection, welfare, its own versions of sovereignty, its own understanding of how it eats food, because Northern Quebec is different than Coast Salish, is different from the Siksika Nation in southern Alberta, is different from a coastal nation in a Mi'kmaq community out east. So we've always sort of, the narrative that has happened in the academy is we talk about Indigenous food systems. And I thought to myself, well, we need to do a better job and try to understand what people express as their own food systems. So learning how Eeyou Cree communities define their own healthy food, understand the relationship between Eeyou Cree food systems and individual food security, and understand how the experience in colonial constructs develop a contemporary version of Eeyou Meechum Miyo Pimâtisiwin. And again, that means Eeyou Meechum, the good life of food, in Eeyou Istchee. My methodology and methods, I'm going to go through, I'm going to leave this here and hopefully I could send out the slides, but it went through a very rigorous, this was almost 4 years of research done partially under COVID. But what really matters here is what people were saying. And so what we have here is the Gukamuch Waski Kami Pinot Circle, or the Gukamuch, the grandmother's circle, that I went to seek out permission to do this work, that the community wanted this work, that they don't needed somebody, that they identified me as somebody who could do the work. And I'm so grateful for this. So when they talked about food, it talked about honoring relationships. The food is part of us, gendered role of foods, you pray for it, it provides energy, it's sacred. And these are from all Cree communities, and there's 10 communities very far apart from each other, but they all came together to share knowledge with me about, and why me, I'm still not sure, about what their food system meant. And when we can put it into the lens of Indigenous Eeyou or Cree epistemologies are enacted through the process such as song, storytelling, ceremony, grounded in ancestral methods of healing that have actively existed since time immemorial, which basically says research has been conducted in Indigenous communities, in Cree communities, and Northern Cree communities, and recognize that that research looks differently to us in the West than it does to people that live and breathe this experience. And the fact that this was shared with me, everybody, and I was shared with many other participants, was beyond a gift that the community gave to me to hand this information off to my PhD, or to carry that information from Cree communities to other places, which is why I'm here in the room, or not here in the room, but why I'm here in the conference. So what was found is the following. Eeyou Istchee Miyo Pimâtisiwin, the good life of food, exists in Cree experience. So we can't talk about Indigenous food security. We talk about Eeyou Cree food, good life. We talk about it lies in the Eeyouch experience. Is seen in socio-cultural health. Includes Eeyou and Winnipeg, which is white settler foods. It has both. We don't often hear that when we talk about Indigenous food sovereignty, because some of that just says we need to go back to where we came from, but it disallows, or it doesn't take into consideration that people's guts and biome have been colonized, and it's not easy to go back. And some communities don't necessarily want to go back. And that's what I heard. Is practiced communally and continuously, is sacred, protects Cree ways of knowing, and in Cree ways of knowing, we're talking about Northern Cree, Eeyou Cree, incorporates gender, is culturally safe. These are pretty important findings that I'm sharing with maybe 20 people. And so the more I share this, the more I'm hoping that people now will see the difference between just talking about Indigenous food sovereignty of this big construct and start breaking it down to what individual nations want, hear, and live. So some things that I heard. Meechum Pimâtisiwin is based in Eeyouch experience, means that anything that comes from the land. Traditional food to me is regionally sourced. So if I go to a Waskaganish, which is another Cree community, get my smoked fish, I've got my traditional food. I spend time with family, go hunting, do things that they love to do. So this is, I call my traditional food, soul food. It does it a lot. The way we cook the food is part of Eeyou Meechum Pimâtisiwin. All local, all based in Cree experience. I don't know how much time I've got left. I'm almost sort of done, but we'll keep going until I get the signal. My grandfather, and that's some moose that I went to eat every day. It was my friend's Minnie's kitchen, and we just go in every day and cut a piece off and cook it, and that's what I ate. My grandfather told us that traditional food is more important than market food and the best your body can have, because we don't mix it with non-native food. Eeyou Meechum was defined as food that originates from Cree territory, be it moose, goose, berry, fish, rodent, plant that is prepared using Eeyouch methods. That means that Eeyouch food is unique, and that requires a unique framing for Eeyouch food sovereignty. And so it becomes down, we need to identify how we can go forward and work better with communities all across not just Turtle Island, but globally.
Stephen,
Yeah,
sorry to interrupt, but we have to wrap it
that's
up
fine.
in the next minute and
Yeah,
maybe move
I
to
have no more than a minute. I'm just going to go through these
perfect.
and that's done.
Okay.
That's fine. Thank you. Meechum provides a deeper appreciation of my culture and heritage. When I kill a moose and share with those around me, others, when they get something, they'll share. So it enforces a code of conduct, a code of ethics, food enforcing code of ethics. When we talk about wild rice teaches us about democracy. It teaches us about reciprocation. My last slide, which is not my last slide, but will be my last slide. Eeyou Meechum is sacred. We don't often think of our food systems as being sacred, but in Cree culture, our ancestors many times come to us in the form of an animal so that we can be fed these traditional foods. And I think that is so important. And finally, we pray for that food because we were born and brought that knowledge. And then when you know, the traditional food is in you. And with that, there's a little bit more to go, but I will conclude it and open it up for any questions and any comments.